So this isn't scripted, so watch out. You never know what I'm going to say, but really we need a dance floor up here. That's all. I'm just going to say. The reading I'd like to share with you this morning is a poem by one of my very favorite poets, Nikki, Giovanni, and the poem is entitled Rosa Parks. And it is about Rosa Parks, but it is also about Emmett Till. You all know who Emmett Till was. This is for the Pullman porters who organized when people said they couldn't, and carried the Pittsburgh Courier and the Chicago Defender to the Black Americans in the South, so they would know they were not alone. This is for the Pullman porters who helped Thurgood Marshall go south and come back north to fight the fight that resulted in Brown v. Board of Education. Because even though Kansas is west, and even though Topeka is the birth of Gwendolyn Brooks, who wrote the powerful Chicago Defender Sends a Man to Little Rock, it was the Pullman porters who whispered to the traveling men, both the bluesmen and the racemen, so that they both would know what was going on. This is for the Pullman porters who smiled as if they were happy and laughed like they were tickled when some folks were around, and who silently rejoiced in 1954 when the Supreme Court announced its 9-0 decision that separate is inherently unequal. This is for the Pullman porters who smiled and welcomed a 14-year-old boy onto their train in 1955. They noticed his slight limp that he tried to disguise with a doo-wop walk. They noticed his stutter and probably understood why his mother wanted him out in Chicago during the summer when school was out. 14-year-old black boys with limps and stutters are apt to try to prove themselves in dangerous ways, but mothers aren't around to look after them. So this is for the Pullman porters who looked over that 14-year-old while the train rolled in reverse of the Blues Highway from Chicago to St. Louis, to Memphis, to Mississippi. This is for the men who kept him safe. And if Emmett Till had been able to stay on a train all summer, he would have maybe grown a bit of a paunch, certainly lost his hair, probably have worn bifocals and bounced his grandchildren on his knee, telling them about his summer riding the rails. But he had to get off the train and ended up in Muddy, Mississippi, and was horribly, beautifully, inexcusably, and unacceptably murdered. This is for the Pullman porters who, when the sheriff was trying to get this body secretly buried, got Emmett's body on the northbound train, got his body home to Chicago, where his mother said, "I want the world to see what they did to my boy." This is for all the mothers who cried. And this is for all the people who said never again. And this is about Rosa Parks, whose feet were not so tired. It had been, after all, an ordinary day until the bus driver gave her the opportunity to make history. This is Rosa Parks from Tuskegee, Alabama, who is also the field secretary of the NAACP. This is about the moment Rosa Parks shouldered her cross, put her worldly goods aside, was willing to sacrifice her life so that that young man in Money, Mississippi, who had been so well protected by the Pullman porters, would not have died in vain. And when Mrs. Parks said no, a passionate movement was born. No longer would it be sole reliance on the law. There was a higher law. When Mrs. Parks brought that light of hers to expose the evil of the system, the sun came and rested on her shoulders, bringing the heat and the light of truth. Others would follow Mrs. Parks. 4 young men in Greensboro, North Carolina would also say no. Great voices would be raised, singing the praises of God and exhorting us to forgive those who trespass against us. But it was the Pullman porters who safely got Emmett Till to his grand uncle. And it was Mrs. Parks who could not stand that death. And not being able to stand it, she sat down. I had the privilege and the honor to serve as a chaplain intern in a hospital in what has been called the inner city of Philadelphia, serving 5 of the most poverty-stricken zip codes in the country. A hospital that sees in any given year a higher rate of infant mortality than many countries in sub-Saharan Africa. I served for the most part on a floor that was for folks with many different kinds of ailments, and I also worked in an emergency room, and spent overnights listening to ambulances and so on. And one morning I came in for my shift, and a young white nurse came up to me, visibly agitated, and she said, you have to go talk to that man. He won't let us take care of his mother, and he scares me. I don't feel like I'm safe doing my job. So I asked her to tell me what room it was, and I went into that room, and the first thing I saw was an elderly woman. She was Puerto Rican. Elderly woman lying in the bed, very, very thin, and kind of thrashing around as though she were really uncomfortable. It was clear that her eyes weren't especially focused. It was clear that she probably couldn't speak, but she just was uncomfortable. And in a chair at the foot of her bed, I saw a man, I'm guessing, I never asked him his age, but I'm guessing somewhere around late 40s, early 50s, who sat rigid in the chair with what to me looked like a look of real pain on his face. And I pulled up a chair near him and I introduced myself. And we began to have a conversation in Spanish. And as we talked for a really long time. And as we talked, mostly I listened, he poured out the story of the years he had spent caring day in and day out for his mother, taking care of her every need, making sure she was fed and clothed and safe. And how finally she'd come to a position where he needed a health situation where he needed to bring her to the hospital. And he said they're treating her like an animal. Told me they dropped her when they were trying to transfer her from the bed to the gurney, and it was so rough and I couldn't stand it when she fell on the floor and she whimpered because she was hurt. I heard that pain. I can imagine many of you in this room have felt that when someone you really love is ill and suffering, perhaps even more in the hospital than we might be at home. I know I felt it for myself. My own mother died of dementia, although she died of early onset dementia. I told him, explained to him as gently as I could that the nurse was afraid that he was going to do her harm, And he looked at me like I was crazy, and he said, "They just don't understand. This is my mother. They don't understand. I wouldn't ever hurt anybody." I said to him as gently as I could, "If this doesn't get resolved, they have the power to ban you from the hospital." I went back to the nurse, and I tried to explain to her that yes, this man felt angry and hurt, but that I had no doubt that he would never cause any harm to her. And at the end of the day, what happened was that what I said didn't matter. He was, in fact, banned from the hospital. And when I came back from the next week to the floor, she was gone, and obviously he was gone too. And I will tell you, and I say this to you from my heart, I still carry the haunting to this day of the possibility that she may have ended her life alone, and that he might not have been able to be there to close her eyes or to say goodbye. And I say these words to you, and you probably can hear some of the pain in my voice, and I want you to know that I also felt huge compassion for this young woman. She was young. She was young in the workforce, and she was in a hospital that required a tremendous amount of its healthcare workers. And while I didn't think she was in any danger, I can understand, as I know many of us in this sanctuary can understand this morning, what it is like to be a young woman and to be afraid for one's safety. There was no winner and there was no loser in terms of who had faltered. Every player, every person in this situation came from a place of pain. It was one of many, many instances where it was clear to me that some voices matter and some don't. And I could be wrong, but my experience tells me that had the roles been reversed and had the man been white and the nurse, the young nurse of color, I can't help but believe that the outcome might well have been different. When voices don't matter, the harm that occurs is not something any of us can truly imagine. It's fair to think that thousands upon thousands upon thousands of such things happen every day. Situations that cause harm, and they might not. If you and I, if all of us who were raised in a nation where society, every interaction in our society over the centuries has been racialized, if we had grown up with different understandings of what it means to reach out, to allow someone to reach out to us across these divides, and simply understand, and simply say, each of us comes with our own life experience. And I could make a long list, and I probably should, of all the situations in where my life experience is inadequate to understand the experience of others, as much as I might try. I learned many things in my year at that hospital. So many things, and it was hands down the most valuable and extraordinary experience in preparation for ministry. But I learned one thing about our faith of Unitarian Universalism, I began that year with fully convinced that nobody wanted a UU chaplain. I mean, who knows what UU, and most of the time you tell people you're a Unitarian Universalist, and I say, oh, is that a cult? It's happened many times. And so I assumed, wrongly, I assumed that it would be a real struggle. And of course the opposite was true. Nobody once asked me, so, what's your faith tradition? They didn't even ask me anything. They just wanted to know if I was someone who saw them. Saw that person in the bed, saw that person waiting to have their leg amputated, saw that person going for their second amputation, saw that person grieving a loss. That's all. That's all. And I found that because our faith of Unitarian Universalism not only invites us, but demands that we make this effort to be, not for the sake of some kind of mythical or future salvation, but for the sake of now. It asks us, it demands of us that we be in this moment with the people who are here with us now. And when I say with us, I mean on the planet now. Our faith condemns our silence and condemns the silence we perhaps unconsciously impose on others. Remember a few weeks ago during the presidential debate when Donald Trump spoke of the Haitian community in Springfield, Ohio? Remember, I won't repeat what was said, but remember the punditry news world erupted in indignation. Well, rightly so. But how often, or did you ever, hear the voice of one of the people impacted? If it happened, it took 10 days. The things I'm talking about are things that exist every day, and the things I hope and pray that we can talk about together. Because as it turns out, our faith allowed me to be present to everyone who needed someone to talk to or to listen. Each of us today has that same possibility. Amen. Ashe, dear ones, and blessed be.